In the last episode, the last thing we see is you walking away from the boat. And it looked like the top wasn't fitting. So what actually happened?
What happened with Bimini 1?
Yes.
So Bimini 1 was a good design. And here's the mistake I made, which I guess I alluded to beforehand. We spent decades chasing the American dream, only to realize that working more to have more wasn't exactly the dream we expected to be living. Together, we walked away from it all to rediscover what's really necessary to live a rewarding life. Inspired by other YouTubers, we bought a fixer-upper sailboat in the hopes of discovering the world anew. Just as soon as we learned to sail. Now, I had good intentions. I think I even mentioned this maybe early on. But all along the way, what we should have been doing, or what I should have been doing, was carrying it back to the boat and dry fitting it again and making sure no adjustments needed to be made. But it's kind of big and cumbersome, and it often takes another person, and I know those are kind of excuses in retrospect, but here was the issue. So making Bimini 1 in this shape while it was on the boat worked fine, and taking it off the boat and placing it upside down was okay, and everything was braced, but I trusted that the fiberglass was going to keep it in shape. But over time, as we added more fiberglass, sanded, it began to bow outward. At least that's kind of what I believe. So that when we turned it back over and put it back on the boat, center line is perfect. I mean, it actually fit fine in terms of size, and for probably 2/3 of it, it was great, sat right on the rails. But as you went out toward either port or starboard out to the edges, it would be off by about a ½ inch in both directions. So what you saw at the end of the episode of us walking around and looking at it was to decide, was it just one side? In other words, if one side was fitting snug, but then the other side margin of error was too big. When it fit, you know, it kept the exact same shape. They were both off by maybe a ½ inch or so.
As you were trying to fit that Bimini, how did you feel as it wasn't fitting?
How did I feel about Bimini 1 not fitting? It's not as heartbreaking perhaps as it appears. I think I was in problem solving mode probably. It's easier to mourn it looking back now, especially editing it and seeing some of the footage, how much time was spent sanding and grinding and everything else. You know, look, there's two ways to look at this. The first is I got a heck of an education in what to do, and undoubtedly Bimini 2 benefited from the fact that I had all of that time spent on Bimini 1. It would be hard to say that's my first fiberglass project. I'd been fiberglassing for quite a while. It wasn't a tremendous letdown, it was more of what's next. And so there was no time between Bimini 1 and Bimini 2. In fact, I'm certain it was the next day that I went and picked up those panels so that I could keep moving. So it was a day of studying it and taking some notes and trying to figure out what was off, figuring out the gap front to back as well as kind of, you know, starboard to port, and trying to make adjustments. So yeah, I realize in retrospect it probably looks like a bigger letdown than it was, but it was just, the project just continued. I think you get the benefit of editing that there's a clear differentiation between Bimini 1 and Bimini 2. The truth is Bimini 2 didn't exist in my head for a few more days until I started to really like the finish out for it and started to consider that perhaps instead of it being a form, it needed to maybe finish out and become its own Bimini, hence 2.0. Plan B, when I was originally designing the Bimini, was to use some fiberglass panel, and the cheapest, sorry to say, fiberglass panels I could use are actually meant for shower installations. What I did is I drove down to Marathon, about 45 minutes down the Keys, and I bought 2 shower fiberglass panels. The trick of that was actually getting it in the Jeep and getting it home. I didn't think about that so much. But in any case, here was the idea, is I really wasn't thinking I was gonna like stitch and glue a brand new Bimini 2. What I really was thinking is I would stitch and glue a shape that then I could transfer onto land, turn upside down, and see where those gaps were. In other words, I was going to use it to form fit. When I got it in place and actually zip tied things down, I realized that it was actually pretty attractive and was a good alternative. So what started out to be a form that I was going to use to make alterations on the first one, what I talked myself into is, you know what, maybe just move along and duplicate the same process and see if I could figure out where the mistake was made. What ended up happening was I kind of liked the style of it. For starters, it's already finished on one side, which is handy. Whether the finish is ideal or not was kind of secondary, but it's already tough, it's resilient, it's a shower install. So I already had, you know, part of that in place. I just kind of wanted to follow the same steps. There was a little bit of different order because half of it was already finished, or was a finished surface. So started with the gutter, for example. I used Nitacore again for that. Chop strand, biaxial, then on top of that, all the exact same steps that you would have seen with Bimini 1 were repeated in Bimini 2 to a much better outcome. In fact, the more time I spent on Bimini 2, the more I liked its fit, the fact that it was thinner, it was lighter, it was easy to maneuver, it was just going to bring up a couple of new challenges. So the next concern with 2.0 is that I want to at least give the appearance of it being more substantial, thicker, I guess, if you will, around the edges. This is more of an illusion than anything else. So look, we want to maintain that it's lightweight. We want to keep this as lightweight as we possibly can within reason. At the same time, it can't look flimsy. I've got the panel actually zip tied up just to hold things in place. And what I'm doing is putting this fiberglass border around. So I'm going to try to show this to you from up above. There you go. So what I've done is taken just 1 inch of Nitacore, run it around the outside. You can see it right here. And then this was the test, is just lapping some fiberglass on it, which still needs to be sanded and cleaned up, but it gives you an idea of what the gutter would look like. The next test is going to be, what can we do with the seam? I've got kind of two things at play here. One is the strap is just keeping the center bow where I need it right now as an adjustment. I mean, that can be cut off and removed or easy enough. But this gap here, so if I did the traditional stitch and glue, I would end up with a seam that you'd be able to see. And I don't know if you're going to be able to tell where the seam is, but the mast is the center line, the seam is over here. So I guess I could have planned ahead with that, but I still would have a pretty visible seam down the center of the boat, which is not something I'm really after. What I'm going to attempt to do, as silly as this sounds, is I'm going to duct tape these two things together. I'm going to put a single row, or a single strip rather, of chop strand in from the top to kind of close the seam. So first things first today, I'm going to try to close the seam with duct tape. We'll get the rest of the guttering done around the edge, and see if we can't start putting a little fiberglass on top.
Caught behind Venetian blinds, out of reach for the city lights. This ain't where I belong. Hey, look at me, man, what I've become. I've been running east, looking for a sunset, digging deep since '99. What I thought was gone.
Okay, I got up this morning, started sanding, realized I forgot to include you. Here's what we've been doing. I'm just using like a little sand block, and we're just kind of running down the edges, getting rid of loose strands and things, getting ready, you know, bumps, any imperfections, getting ready for the bigger surface. Well, that's never good.
What I thought was gone was sitting in my pocket in plain sight. All alone.
It was built right side up and primarily built almost completely on the boat. Okay, so we got the whole thing fiberglass now all the way across. Got some touch up to do, a couple of seams here to deal with. And what we've done is gone along the edge with the hot glue and glued the remainder of the gutter on. Got some chop strand on that side. This side we're just kind of getting in place aft because we got to deal with the electrics. Okay, working on solar panel feet. So what I'm going to do is make a little jig here. The panel feet are roughly, what, 28.5 inches apart. So we're going to make a jig so that when we lay this down, we'll be able to sand it, and that way the panels will always mount level. You can see the corner that needs to be taken off for this to lie level. Alright, we got the feet glued down, fiberglassed in at least. Okay, so done every part of this Bimini before, twice. But we've never done this before, so here comes a little gel coat. Try to make this look a little prettier at least. Go with some white. Let's try 8 ounces. What the heck, right? Eight maybe a bit. But you know what, after it poured that fast, 8 it is. I did a little bit of a test on this just to kind of see. This has wax in it because I'm going for just one coat. It looks like our ratio for mech is going to be like, what, 3.3 cc's, which of course we don't have a line for. But we do know where 5 is, and we know where 2.5 is, so let's see if I can get you to, that's 2.5. Wait a minute, is that right for 8? Yeah, 3.3. All right, the mech is in. So that kind of starts the timer running. I'm going to treat this like all the epoxies, where if you think you've mixed it, mix it some more. Really kind of hoping that wax was mixed in pretty well. Put it in a few hours ago, well, this morning I guess, but and I shook it up a whole lot. So we're gonna go with a roller. All right, so we're just gonna mix up maybe like, you know, $1 of this at a time. So we got a little Formula 27. I'm gonna put a little hardener in this. I'm gonna mix this up really well. This like incorporates by color, so you can kind of tell once you've got it together. Okay, let's Formula 27 all the way around. Let's get this dude sanded. So Bimini 2 is built pretty much using the exact same features. The question was going to be, was it as functional? Did it look as good as Bimini 1, which I was still really attached to? I mean, I put a lot of time into that. So here are the solar panels attached to the feet, and you can see we got one on each side of the sail pack, even though right now the mizzen is pulled over to one side, but that probably gives you the best attachment. It was more design changes on the outside, which could all be done with the Bimini currently in place on the boat. Did it fit better because of that? Yeah, probably so. Bimini 1 could have been, had I made more trips with Bimini 1 back and forth to the boat, we probably would have caught the spreading going on early and been able to make minor adjustments or bungeed it. And in my mind, I still kind of thought that I should make the attempt to cut Bimini 1 to see if it was going to fit as well. But I don't know. This is a whole new problem. 2 Biminis instead of 1?
And what happened to Bimini 1?
Oh, the big question is, what did you do with Bimini 1? Well, I cut it up.
Did you cry while you were doing it?
No, there was, listen, one of the benefits is Bimini 2 was already in place. And so the solar panels were already installed. I was pretty confident. I didn't do that like immediate. That was, maybe a week later. There was some talk about what else it could be used for. There are actually a couple of strips that are still here. We use them for other things now, so it's a good solid work surface. The edges have been cut and the center is still actually here, and so there's always a benefit. Yeah, there's so many people to think with the Bimini. I mean, just from a support and other well, Gordon was the hero. He was there right in the beginning, and while I was learning to mix ratios of the mech from death, and so we had these warnings on do not get this stuff on your skin, it's really horrible. So while I was kind of working more on fiberglass ratios, he was doing a lot of that initial install on Bimini 1, so big shout out to Gordon. There were so many people in the yard. Mark helped me carry things so many times. There's just another set of hands. Aaron did some filming. Mark and Aaron are on Dulcinea. Carol here in the yard did some filming for us. When something doesn't work out and people say, great, what's next? That's certainly a way to approach it. If there's any advice I would give anyone, A, don't be timid, go try it. But second is be vocal when you're in the store. Just talk to people. I learned more by telling people I didn't know what I was doing, and got as much advice as I possibly could on which supplies to use. Look, there's even brands there. There's a lot of variety, and there's a lot of great products out there, and you got to kind of you got to get engaged with everybody in order to get good advice. So the Bimini really, you see me doing a lot of the work, but there's a community behind all the boat projects. I think everyone would probably tell you that working on boats, but ultimately you got to get the work done. But there's a lot of input and a lot of extra hands along the way, all of which is much appreciated. Wouldn't have ended up with a Bimini 1 or 2 all alone.